and welcome to the Dev Game Club podcast, the cast where a pair of veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and each week I am joined by my co-host, a man who has been waiting for 20 years for the sequel to Mortimer and the Riddles of the Medallion.
Tim Longo. That was a good one. That was a good one.
Yeah,
Holy.
Thank you.
Wow, that was a blast. I was like, where is he going to go with this? Yeah. Which I keep forgetting to mention, by the way, you have inadvertently, I know you don't listen to DLC, right? The podcast, Jeff Cannata and Christian Spicer. Jeff Cannata opens every episode the same way you do, except he talks about Christian in that same way. So, you know, it's a good tried and true joke.
I think it comes from like David Letterman or something.
Oh yeah, maybe. I knew it was from some kind of stalwart place, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think they used to do that when he was over at. Was he at NBC first, I guess? Wherever he was before. Yeah, he was at NBC. And then
late.
Right. I think they did it there. I don't know if they took it with them to CBS, because I stopped watching around then because I just had children or something and no longer could stay up till 11:30.
Ringing a bell now, yeah. Good one, Mortimer. Whew. Wow.
Yeah. MIDI snail game.
Oh, man. Taking that Rebel Assault engine and, repurposing it into a snail. Yeah, that's really wacky.
Classic stuff, man. Classic stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, that basically introduces part of what we wanted to do this time, which was to talk a little bit about who we are. We've been lucky enough this past few days to have a sudden surge of listenership, and we encourage people to go back and check out earlier episodes, which we'll talk about in a moment. But in particular, we thought it'd be good to reintroduce ourselves after getting a little coverage at Kotaku and having our stats suddenly swell. So Mortimer takes us back to the very beginning for you.
Yeah, that was actually, I think it was technically the first quote unquote game that I tested at LucasArts back in '96. And then it went on to X-Wing versus TIE Fighter and Shadows of the Empire and some Dark Forces and things like that. But yeah, and then went into level design, Mysteries of the Sith, and a few other things. And then we met on Starfighter and Jedi Starfighter, and then Republic Commando, and then I went to Crystal, worked on Tomb Raider, and I'm at 343 now as creative director there.
It's really great. So you've had we've each actually had a title come out that we worked on in the recent past. I started, as you said, with Starfighter. I was a lead programmer on Jedi Starfighter and a senior programmer, I guess, on the original Starfighter, and then of course I made the transition over eventually to Republic Commando after working for a little while on the failed Full Throttle 2 project.
That's right.
Oof. Some stories to tell there, but that's not what this podcast is about. I knocked around for a couple years after Republic Commando doing some consulting and stuff, and ultimately ended up at Bethesda Game Studios, where I was a lead programmer. I guess I just kind of helped close out Fallout 3, and then a lead programmer of the systems group for Skyrim, and I was lead programmer for a couple of years on Fallout 4 before I decided to take a kind of a little bit of a break from leading AAA teams because it gets exhausting. So, yeah, we have had a rich and storied career. And during that time, the games industry has changed a lot, and that's kind of what we're examining here on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really, really fun to go back. And a lot of the games we're playing, were released around the time that we both kind of were still early in our careers. And so it's an interesting kind of comparison of nostalgia for me, as well as, not that I had played Final Fantasy IX at the time, but System Shock was a good one for us to start off on because I think we both were playing it when it came out. In 98, and so it was both early for us, and it's just been, I hadn't anticipated that the kind of the timestamp and the nostalgia for playing these games and remembering back how much that would also equate to what we were doing as developers at that time. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it has been. And also, because they were early in our career, they've been somewhat formative for us. They've definitely influenced what we do. And maybe there'd be more one-off stuff in 343's work if you had played Final Fantasy IX back in 2000 or 2001 or whatever.
I think Halo 5 could have really done with a swinging cage puzzle where you have to swing back and forth, or maybe a card game. Although Gwent in Witcher 3 is a thing, which I have had
absolutely
more than one thought. I'm wondering if they had been influenced by Tetra Master at all.
Yeah, I wonder about that too, actually. I don't remember too much about how Gwent plays.
It's pretty different. I actually, ironically, just played some of it today, so
maybe we can definitely get to that because that's going to come up. We specifically wanted to call out a couple of things. This podcast idea sort of builds on the work of RebelFM, which is a podcast you listen to quite a bit, and I think you were one of their guests at one point.
They had done, I had listened to them since they're all most of them are ex 1UP employees after 1UP closed. They had a podcast called, what was it called? Rebel FM, or no, it was called 1UP FM. And then when that closed down, they started Rebel FM. Excuse me. And, one of their formats, I think even David Ellis, who works at 343 now, and a few others started this up. And, they would do the same thing. Game club, play along with the audience, episode by episode, piece by piece. And then they would try to end with a guest from somebody who was on the game team. I just love that format. I just love book club kind of feel, about things and the pacing of it and playing along. And they actually also did Hitman Blood Money as one of their games, but they also did Republic Commando. And so they had me on for that, but I thought it was a cool format, and there really isn't a lot out there podcast wise that is very developer centric with, developers talking about games and, and kind of seeing through that lens. There's a lot of press stuff out there, but
sure. Right. And just sort of finding what we find interesting in games, like things that set them apart, and things that we specifically would take away from them, or maybe have taken away from them in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly I feel like, we may have talked about this, but System Shock 2 was something that made us consider making Jedi Starfighter have a strong RPG bent, in terms of character development. Though we couldn't do that in the kind of time we actually had, that would have been nearly impossible to balance in the year or so that we built that game in. And to your point about guests, we've been lucky enough to have a couple of great ones. We had Ken Levine on to talk about his work on System Shock 2 and about the team generally. And then Janos Flösser, who was the managing director, I guess. He started up with IO Interactive in Denmark and Copenhagen to build that studio and to build that specific game. And that was also a fascinating conversation for me.
Yeah, it's funny. I had never, we had become good friends when I was at Crystal, and Crystal and IO were kind of sister studios. But for whatever reason, I realized after we had, done the episode with him, he and I had never actually talked about the origins of Hitman, even though I had been a fan the whole time. So it was actually really fascinating for me too, because I just had never had that conversation. So that was cool.
Yeah, that's pretty terrific. I guess with all that intro kind of out of the way, we should probably start diving into Final Fantasy IX. I want to come right out first. We had a couple of pieces of email this week, and I appreciate the email from folks.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I am going to read one specific thing to connect with what we'll talk about, but one thing is that I totally got something wrong, and that was that the composer was not Tetsuya Nomura, who's the character designer and a creative director for the series. The composer was actually Nobuo Uematsu. So I knew that, and at the time I was fumbling and looking on the internet because I'm like, I don't think this is right, and I can't remember. Sometimes when you're A, up late for me, and B, recording a podcast, you're not thinking as quickly on your feet as you should be, and I didn't have that note at hand. So I appreciate the emails from Ed and Luke in particular, who said that. Who said that about that? So that was they cleared it up for me. They're like, you probably have thousands of emails. I'm like, I don't have thousands of emails. I appreciate getting a couple for sure.
I'm sure there were thousands of people shouting at the.
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah. I do that whenever I listen to a podcast. Even I listen to a lot of film criticism, and I'll just be like bonking my head like that doesn't make any sense at all. You're crazy. But rarely do I step out and actually email them. So I do appreciate getting contact from a couple of folks to clear that up. Because even listening back to it, I was like, I know this is wrong. But I was under the gun production wise, and I didn't go back and look it up. So thank you. I appreciate it. Mea culpa, mea culpa.
One thing I would quickly mention too that about the early episodes, we have the first System Shock stuff was kind of under a beta banner, so our sound quality starts off a little rough, but stick with it. We I think by the third or fourth episode, we hit our stride on the sound quality side and get a little better. If you guys do choose to go back and listen.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, by the time we had Ken on, I think we'd worked all that stuff out, and the quality of that. Except for some natural kind of gaps that occur just because you're not in the same room. Other than that, I actually think we sound like we're sitting around the table together. So, I think we've finally nailed that down pretty well. But anyway, turning again to Final Fantasy IX.
Oh my God! I guess this game.
The big question is, is this going to turn us into a Final Fantasy podcast? Are we just going to play all the Final Fantasies now?
No. I mean, I will say that I have been happily surprised coming in. I think I mentioned it in the first episode, or maybe when we had announced that we were going to play this game in the previous series, that I had not played really JRPGs, definitely not all the way through. And I was pretty hesitant, as I know you were a bit for playing Hitman as well. And I'm still struggling with what I think about the game, to be honest. I mean, I'm actually really enjoying it. I'm having a good time. But there's definitely, I'm conflicted, because it's so different from what I'm used to. And I'm such a big RPG fan. In fact, I'm still playing Witcher 3 kind of in tandem with this. So it's really wacky to be playing those two games side by side.
That is a weird pair of games to play side by side, for sure.
And it's just so charming and so delightful. And it's so, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I feel like someone created a new genre that I had just recently, and I'm finally playing it, or I'm just now playing it, but it's been around for years, and it's just like fish out of water. And so I'm still struggling with how I feel about it. Though I did mention to Brett offline that it's grabbed me enough to where I did play a bit of Ni no Kuni. This is something that I kind of, after playing this, I kind of want to go back to, because I remember that game being very charming and kind of having a nice feel. And then I'm also a big MMO fan. And so I've always been interested, but kind of scared of, 14. I think they shut 11 down actually recently. So I think 14 is the only thing.
I think that's gone. Yeah, 14 is what's there.
Yeah, so, if I jump into an MMO, then I will be playing forever. So,
well, that'd be something.
It's an intriguing game and charming for sure. But I don't know if I'm becoming a JRPG player yet or not.
Yeah, well, it is kind of all over the place. I was really struck this time by both the sort of return of a lot of sort of theatrical thinking and in particular with Kuja, just how much that is what he's all about. And then also, like at the total other end of the spectrum, there's some very broad humor that happens at times, and you're just like, what is going on? Like, I've got both ends. Although, Shakespeare was the same way, right?
Oh yeah,
he was not afraid to make some sort of very broad physical kind of humor joke, and neither certainly is this.
No,
so good.
And I mean, in fact, that was one of his staples, right? Like the balance of not to get too academic and theatrical all of a sudden, but as we talked about before, my education's actually in theater. part of the balance, and in many scholars' opinions, the brilliance of his stuff was that that balance of humor and drama even in the tragedies, and we've been emulating it ever since. I mean, the Greeks had some of that, but he really, I think, was the one that was kind of given credit for perfecting that kind of combination, because Hamlet has Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and stuff. So
absolutely.
And I really am interested. I mean, I think some of the, like Jason and who wrote the article in Kotaku, and a few others have mentioned that the Shakespeare was very intentional and is a thing, even though we were talking about it, kind of discovering it ourselves early in the series. I don't know if we'll ever get to talk to anybody about it, but I really want to know if that's actually true. Like if they actually set a goal out to, and have that direct inspiration or not.
I can't imagine not at this point, but maybe we should key in first to kind of where we left off, because actually I think it sort of emotionally sets the tone again for the story, and probably is a good place to start as a result. But that's with the Black Mage Village, which is hidden in that forest, which is amusingly tagged with two signs. One direction has owls and one direction has no owls. If you look at the little sign post, it's like no owls this way. Did you not do that?
I did. Wait, so, well, I went both ways and then had the wraparound maze. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, but there's a sign post at each location which tells you if you go this way, there aren't any owls. And somebody had given you a hint earlier to follow the path where there are no owls. How long did you spend in that maze?
Well, I'm trying to remember. I think I just went at the initial fork in the road where that sign is. I just kind of it just put me back out into that same screen. Is there actually like if I went farther in, would I keep going to different screens?
I think, well, they all look the same.
Oh, okay. But So I just avoided it at that point.
Yeah, I think it's a maze of twisty little passages, all the same.
I see.
All alike, I should say.
Yeah. I wonder, it just dawned on me, I guess it's probably a thematic thing beyond this, but owls are a big theme in Twin Peaks. I just finished watching.
Yes, I know. I think I tweeted about that when I reached that point. Or maybe I just made a note to myself. I was like, "Oh my God, Twin Peaks!"
Yeah.
I definitely wrote that down.
Yeah,
yeah, it's pretty good. But the thing that hooks in there is you start getting into knowing about Vivi kind of being maybe an orphan, or thinking of him as an orphan, and then over the course of this section that we play through, you get reveals that Zidane and Dagger are both themselves orphans, and you finally get an explanation of the opening cutscene that opened the whole thing that I don't think we ever discussed, because it was such a one-off, weird, like, here's these people in a boat, what's going on kind of story.
Right.
There's so much that happened in this section that I feel like you're going to have interesting things to talk about. But that was the first place I started was like, oh, here's another theme that's starting, to evolve, and it's like multiple permutations on a theme. Something that you might see again in Shakespeare, having an orphan, or more generally sort of Victorian and pre-Victorian era fiction. To have orphans who are other than they seem, maybe something about their past is, it comes up in Dickens. I mean, it comes up everywhere, right? This is such a common narrative trope. But I don't feel like it's something that happens too often in games that we do that in a direct way. I mean, normally the player is occupying a character who, as we talked about in the first episode, doesn't really have a story of their own. So they're kind of an orphan in that sense, and it's really just a player stand-in. But here they're very, all these people have this thing in common, and maybe that's why they get along so well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I didn't put all of those characters two and two together. The other kind of theme that I like. I tend to always like this theme when it pops up in fantasy or science fiction as well, or anywhere really. But whenever you have that kind of automaton or robot, entity of some kind coming into self-actualization and becoming sentient and kind of, asking those questions about existence and stuff, not to get too, heady about it. But when the black mages are at the gravesite of some of their friends and they're talking about, what that means. And I just love that theme. We deal with some of that theme in Halo 5 as well. And so,
well, it's Blade Runner, entirely, right? I mean, those are created beings, the replicants, who are made to do work that nobody else wants to do, just the same way that the black mages are here.
Yeah.
So very much, and having the same sort of limitations on their life.
Yeah, exactly. And coming to that realization. It's cool. It's interesting. The village itself, I thought was kind of a neat idea, and I'm glad they did it too. They could have really kept the black mages in a pretty two-dimensional or one-dimensional kind of thing. And I was hopeful because, as we talked early in the series, Vivi seems to be somewhat of an important character. And it just grows more and more, he's growing more and more to be that over time. And that village was pretty key to, I think, a character arc kind of transition for him, which is cool. I really like the little guy, complete with his little stumbles that he has almost every time you see him, he trips. And
he gets knocked on his butt or pushed from behind. It's great when he finally returns to, Alexandria, and like the first time you see him, he gets knocked over, just like in the first time you see him when he's there at the very beginning of the game. It's so great.
Yeah. And I thought it was not to jump ahead, but I thought it was interesting that later when they actually give you an option to kind of go for him to go back to his home, I guess it was.
Yes.
So maybe, we can hit that when we get to it. But I thought that was cool as well.
Yes, I did too. And actually that kind of reinforced that sort of orphan thing. It just kind of reminded me again, like that's what was going on there. But yeah, we'll get to that. That's in a little while. That's around where we stopped, actually.
It's pretty late. Yeah, it's pretty late.
Yeah, it's pretty late in what we played through. I should point out that we both decided to not go all the way through to Mount Gullug, because we figured we already had plenty to talk about, and we're going to be reintroducing the podcast proper this time as well. So we will pick up from where we played to this time and play quite a bit further, I think. But I think we might end up with 5 main episodes this time, just because it is a pretty long game. But so from the Black Village, let's see, where do we go then? I guess we went back to Sanctuary, and we got married.
Yeah, I wrote a note down. This, the note is basically, this game has everything. There's even a marriage. And then
that's right.
And then the next,
it's like Peter Molyneux was designing it.
Yeah, which I love for sure, and super surprising. And I mentioned to Brett before we started recording, it's like this. I don't know if I've played a game in a while that has surprised me this much, like around every turn. It's getting a little ridiculous, like almost like they were trying to outdo themselves or something. But again, maybe this is just a JRPG thing that I've never, experienced. But you've mentioned before, like comparing it to 7 and 8, that this one maybe doesn't take itself as seriously. So maybe it goes a little farther. But then my next note was, oh my God, there's a marriage. Wait a second, there's 2 marriges.
That's right.
To back. And I guess optionally, I chose to have, the other 2 get married too. I'm sure I think you could choose not to, right? It was kind of
I think that's a false choice. It's a forced choice. I think you actually, I don't know, because I did, and it didn't occur to me to ask you what you were going to do. Since we aren't playing them directly in concert, it's kind of hard to know sometimes. It would be good to. It's not a game that you can easily make different decisions, and keep track of that, like unlike System Shock 2. Like, I'm going to play as this kind of character. Right. It's very, very different because it is pretty narrow and linear from a lot of standpoint. But I do feel like when I was making that choice, it felt like this is probably the only way this can really go. And I've seen those choices play out in other places where it's, one of the nice things about having written dialogue rather than spoken dialogue is that it's very easy to customize and add in just enough text to justify how you end up at the same place and have it make total sense and not even think about it. You might even leave the player thinking thinking they're very clever. And you can do that with text in a way that often doesn't sell as well with voice. Because you'd have to really record two whole different scenes, I think, often. And normally those things don't kind of come along until very late in production, making it hard to do. Text you can change up to the very last minute. But yeah, did you find the mechanical humor in this level, the sanctuary level?
What do you mean?
So one of the things, let's see, I forget whether it was System Shock or Hitman 2 where I was talking about how they found ways to make the mechanics do amusing things. And what I found here was there's a place, you've noticed, I assume, that there are numerous places where you can kind of wander around the walkable area and you'll find a chest that you can't actually see. Have you? Has that happened to you? Yeah, okay. All right. So, and, part of, I figured you would because you're so OCD about covering the whole area. But so you can do that, and how it signals to you is you can usually see the character, and then you see the little exclamation point go over his head, and that's your cue to hit the X button, I guess, to open that chest. This time, if you go around, there's a woman named Jenny who's very flirtatious. Because you're kind of at that point trying to figure out how you're going to get out of this place, and apparently you have to marry somebody. So you can go and talk to Jenny, and she's like, "I'm not going to marry you. You're not a dwarf," or something like that. If you walk around behind her, there's one of those exclamation points that come up, and you as a player, you just immediately like, "Oh, cool," chest. But instead, when you do that, it treats it as if you've checked out her behind, and she catches you at it.
Are you serious?
It's so good.
I missed it.
Because it's such a great moment because there were a couple times when I really laughed out loud, and because these are little moments that you forget in 15 years. But when that played out, I just was like, "Oh, you got me. That is so good." Because she's the equivalent of going, "Oh, you're so fresh," but
that's hilarious.
It's really great. I love when games do that, when they use their mechanics in a surprising way. It was something that I liked in Gone Home, where it plays on your expectations of what things are going, what things are happening, or the way in which you're going to find stuff in the level, and how little stories get told that way, just in the order that you're probably going to find them. And this was the same thing where I just, my reaction as soon as I see that exclamation point in a non-combat area is I just hit the button automatically. And without thinking about where I am in relationship to this character, Jenny. So good.
That's also not to overanalyze it, but that's games, right? Like you can't do that in other mediums. That kind of stuff, that playing on expectation and being able to have a little bit of that interactivity and have humor come from that is also very rare, even within games. It's cool.
Yeah, it's one of the real strengths of. It's one of the things that Ron Gilbert will talk about is being hard in doing comedy in games, because of course he does a lot of that. Is that it's really, really difficult because humor is so much about timing. So often, and in this case, you're kind of getting. You're not getting humor through timing, but through sort of repetition and a build of expectation. So you're totally expecting one sort of thing to happen because it has happened at this point 50 or 100 times, right? Who knows? A large number of times, because at this point we're maybe 13, 15 hours in or something like that. Probably at least twice an hour we've found a chest that you can't actually see. And, it builds up that expectation. And in a way, a lot of comedy really just is that. It's an expectation of one thing is going to happen, and when something different happens, it's man bites dog, right? It's the inversion of your expectation that kind of makes something like that funny, So not that anybody finds man bites dog all that funny anymore, but
well,
it was
repetition in general.
The story,
right? That's
right, sure,
a part of humor for sure as well.
Yeah, it's humor through repetition. Humor through repetition. Humor through repetition. See, it works. It works every time.
Clever. Oh goodness.
But yeah, I love that. I'm sorry that you missed that, because that was one of the one of the really funny moments in the game.
I think I just immediately somehow figured out that it was. Well, I married Dagger. I assume that's who you're supposed. Is that the only person you?
Yes. That's the only way through.
I don't remember how it came to pass, but I just quickly, it just happened, and then I was off to the races. So I didn't do any exploration during that part. Yeah,
there's not a lot, and I think it's for me just a habit to just kind of, I'm back here. I don't remember this character, and I talked to this character, and I'm like, well, I'll check around this area, and it just kind of. It's just my JRPG brain,
mm-hmm.
My Final Fantasy IX brain picking that stuff up.
Yeah.
But also, one of the things that's kind of going on in this whole section, and I guess where we go next is to the Summoner Village, Medallion. I feel like that's the next place we go.
Yeah, pretty much.
And one of the big things that happens...
Eco is also introduced kind of at the tail end of this, right? Because she's
stealing stuff. Because she's stealing food, right? And we had seen her the first time we were there, and we didn't know... it didn't pay off. It just showed, the top of her head, and you were like, what is that about? And, there are a lot of thieves in this game in different guises, and you sort of get the sense that, for me, I was like... I don't think that this is the same character, but there's a thief who shows up in Treno and robs dagger the first time you're in Treno of 1,000 gil or something like that.
Oh yeah,
which at that point, the four-armed character, right? And I was like, I don't think that's the same character, because I don't think he had purple hair. And I'd kind of forgotten. Like I said, some of this stuff I just forget. So it is really fun for me to play this game again.
Well, and
there's all these different thieves. Yes, and she has a Moogle with her. Yeah, I almost introduced you this week as a person who has been carrying around a Moogle in your dress, but I used a Moogle-based joke last week.
Moogle-based joke, great. Koopo. Oh, Koopos. A lot of Koopo in this section.
Yeah, so what I like about what happens in Medallion is there's a time... when you're kind of going around and checking into everyone's feelings.
Yeah.
What is, and that is another thing that the games that would be one thing that I think would bring a lot of games to greater life, would be just to get into somebody's opinion about something. You see it sometimes in other RPGs, notably BioWare RPGs, where, and even going back to Baldur's Gate, I want to say, you would have characters kind of comment along the way of how they like or didn't like a thing. It happens in the original Dragon Age, whatever that one's called. Origins. Yes. There's, but there the mechanics are very clear, because they're basically showing you +1, -1.
Yeah.
This person's unhappy with you, this person's happy with you. And that may have been true of Baldur's Gate as well. Here it's literally just check in on how everybody's feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wrote a note down, too, at this point that also reflects later when you get back to, which I won't jump ahead too much, but when you get back to Alexandria, and I'll return to the point then, but pacing, the pacing of this game it's weird, but also it's very unique, and I don't know if this is a JRPG thing as well, but in other games, but because... of the topic we talked about last time, where there's so much custom one-off and kind of linear thinking to the way that the game was built. Okay, we're going to go to this town, and in this town, these things are going to happen just because we want them to. It's not. There's no sense of kind of not to use a silly acronym, but the ROI of this. They just did it because they wanted to, and then it creates this pacing where you can go to this village where you meet Eco, and you can have this downtime where there isn't any combat, there's nothing else to do other than to talk to people, and it just because they wanted the pacing to be that. And it has a different, when you mentioned Baldur's Gate or other RPGs or even more linear games that on another genre that is also often linear in this era, separate from maybe System Shock, ironically, shooters, right? It's like there's a rhythm and a pacing to things that you're going to return to in the Baldur's Gate games. The pacing is going to change when you get to a town, but then when you're out of town, all of the systems and mechanics are always just going. There's never really this time where you can have a breather other than going back to sell your stuff, and talk and get some quests. And playing Witcher right now as well. I love Witcher 3, but I kind of know when the pacing's coming. You know what I mean? Like the expectations are pretty clear about what the structure of the game is. And again, like I mentioned earlier in this episode, I have no idea what this game is going to throw at me. Literally, like, it's like I come to this village and I'm talking to everybody about their feelings, which was a breath of fresh air, but just unexpected.
Well, I mean, I think what it feels like is playing a pen and paper game with a really good DM who's sensitive to the needs of, players to change up what they're doing, right? I mean, it feels like playing like a D&D game or whatever, where you have a DM who really understands you and takes time to invest in different aspects of the type of play that you like. So you know what? We're going to have a little role-playing session here, which is just about role-playing and not, there's no threat. You can take your time. Here it's less that just because you have to hit a certain number of beats before you can even progress, which wouldn't necessarily be the case with pen and paper. But, there you've got a human being to be your brain instead of, an underpowered PS1. So I've met some people who, PS1s could probably outperform. But, but it is sort of like, it's a really...
Yeah, it's a good point.
It's really thoughtful. It's really thoughtful about, okay, the players just had these big things happen. Maybe now's a good time for a breather. Or let's just cool it down a moment. They've just gotten married, which is a big emotional day for everyone. Let's just chill.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Yeah, well, and it's, I'd have to go back and look at the list of games that you mentioned for launching around this time, but it just wasn't that common to have this kind of stuff in the game industry at this point. Where people would be willing to take a risk on that. Yeah, you have the BioWare stuff, which is probably leading the charge when it comes to Western, RPGs writing wise, and there were some memorable characters there that I can think of right now, but I don't know. Nothing's coming to me like this. I have to go back and play some of that stuff, and so they're just taking risks here, whether they knew it or not. That just you couldn't find other places. To counter my own point about the pacing, nice pacing here, I'll come back to it when we get back to Alexandria. But I actually had a bit of an opposite feeling when we went back to Alexandria during that whole section. But I'll get to that.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that. Yeah, and I just want to check in with you here, Tim, before we have a break. How are you feeling?
Yeah, good pacing. It's about time.
Yep. There you go. All right.
When does do we get to fight soon?
We're going to do that with a quick time event. So left. All right. Welcome back from the break. I remembered, or Tim reminded me while we were on the break, that I asked him to throw some questions my way this time. What do you got? I'm ready. I'm wound up.
Yeah, I think Brett started. Did you start on System Shock, or was it Hitman where you started asking a question?
I think it was Hitman, because I wanted to know whether it was the systems or the scripting.
That's right. Yeah. No, that was good. Yeah, so I see he started a little mini tradition here that I think we're going to keep going with, and I don't know if my question is quite as good as his initial question for Hitman. Oh, and you asked me when we started this one off too. In an earlier episode, but I won't spoil that in case you go back and listen to those, audience. But my first question, I have a couple kind of, they go together. When you started, so this was your first JRPG, when did you know you were hooked? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a moment, but like, how did it grab you back then, if you can remember, and why do you think that it hooked you?
I mean, it's a lot of the things that we've been talking about in terms of surprises. But I think the other thing that really hooked me in, I'm a huge reader. I mean, you know this about me. I've read like 80 books so far this year, and it's May.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
And, so I read a lot. I love to read. It's the thing I do. I would give up games before books.
Blasphemy.
Yeah. It's... Yeah, but it's just, I think what I really appreciated about this, and what was so different, was that there were these characters who, like I sort of introduced talking about this, they're characters who were joining at a point in their journey. And therefore they felt a lot more well-rounded than probably any Western RPG character I had encountered to that point.
Yeah.
And
I see that.
Yeah, there are some good ones. Like, there are ones that I remember, sure, from, like I said, from like Baldur's Gate or something. And definitely, BioWare is getting better and better with this every game that they do. Like, I played Dragon Age Inquisition, quite a lot last fall. And, their side, their sidekicks on all the sort of stories that they all have are all really great. But the problem I have with the kind of model in the Western RPGs is that it's all still player driven. That, okay, I'm going to go ask this sidekick about his story or her story, and then as a result, maybe we'll have a quest that has to do with that. But it's all kind of like, because I was interested, we went and did that. Here, it's just part of who they are, and you can't separate that out, and that feels very literary to me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It feels like a literary game.
Yeah. I mean, even if the story is, borrows stuff from Blade Runner and a ton from Shakespeare, which I don't even think I caught the first time. I had 2 young children, so I was barely sleeping, and I can't say that I picked up on any of that at all last time. So that's how it got its hooks in, and I think that made me hungry for more like it. Yeah. Though I didn't end up, we were really busy finishing Starfighter when this came out. And so I feel like I can remember actually being at the end of this game, and there is a section where you can't save, and there's like a ton of cutscenes that happen that just kind of finish out everything, all the storylines and things like that. And I was like supposed to go somewhere, like something important, and I'm like, I'm sitting here and I'm like looking at my watch, and I'm like, my wife's gonna kill me because I'm not at this place I said I would be, or whatever. I definitely remember like having this, but I was so hooked. Yeah. I had to know. And part of that was all tied into the fact that I had really gotten to care about these characters. Yeah. I actually made a note this time that I wondered if the reason why Vivi is so appealing to us and to players generally, I think, of the series, is that I think in a lot of ways he is the stand-in for the player. He's nerdy and he's gawky and he's weak, but he's also capable of great power, right? He's like, this is a thing that a nerdy teenager wants to hear, or even a nerdy parent of 2 young children, as I was in the year 2000. It's something you want to hear, that like, and this is like so common in young adult fiction, for example, that you are special. that despite the fact that you don't fit in and, you don't dress like everybody else and you're kind of a nerd and totally weak, you're capable of really great things. And that's what the case is with Vibi. And I think that's why he's a huge hook. And he's not like a superhero hook. He's not like just pretending to be this thing. It's like, no, this is who he actually is. Yeah. And it feels like he's an awkward preteen or teenager that's in all of us who, might be playing games. I don't know. He comes right out and says some things like that, how he's kind of weak, and people have to remind him that he is actually stronger than he thinks, and that, that's something that feels like also kind of a nerd experience, that your parents are telling you, no, things are going to get better. It's not always going to be like high school, right? Or something like that. Yeah. So I think all of those things kind of tie in to why this particular game got its hooks in. But I did end up really liking just the play, even though I found the random battles frustrating, because it'd be like, it'd be, when you're an adult and you have responsibilities, those things are a pain in the ass. Cause it's just, I totally get that. Like I have no defense. I think there are systemic reasons why they work. And to be fair, in the overworld, you can save at any time, right? So at least there you have the possibility, of just putting it down. I actually did that this time. I was like, I know it said that I could do this. How do I do that?
I totally forgot about that. Actually, now that you mention it, I need to use that more.
Yeah. If you just hit, I think, the square button when you're in the overworld.
Yeah, no, I remember it now. Yeah. And then they have the Chocobo thing, which was that added for the special for this version? I thought I remember reading that they added that. So because you can call Chocobo and then just skip battles in the overworld if you want to.
Yeah, I don't think that's new. Okay. I'm pretty sure that was there, although I still don't myself have a Chocobo, so I can't do that.
Yeah, I got it early when when we first went to the overworld, and there's that Chocobo forest.
Yeah, you went and found that stuff. Well, you were trying to grind, right?
Yeah.
Which was something I ended up having to do this time. So maybe we'll jump ahead to that particular battle with the soul cage underneath the Ifa tree.
Yeah, that was a neat. Just as a quick mention, that was a neat journey. Down the tree into the roots and stuff. I thought it was well done, and the backgrounds were beautiful, and the music was really good. I remember, and the audio design. Cool little journey there.
Yeah, I mean, the Ifa tree almost. I feel like I'm describing a romantic comedy, but the Ifa tree itself feels like a character. Because it is. It's underlying so much of what's going on in this world with pumping the mist to the other continent through the roots and all the stuff that's going on. It kind of explains why the mist is all low-lying. But you're right. One of the things that was really great about the Ifa tree is that it's got kind of this like pulsing underbelly. That is really, it uses that trick of contrast to make something look way brighter than you think your monitor can do. If you look at a pure white monitor, it's not all that bright. But if you look at the base of the Ifa tree, it seems much brighter than it is, because it kind of grays, uses gradations of the lighter color greens around the bright white green. I love those sorts of effects in games generally, because they kind of use the human perceptual system rather than the capabilities of the monitor. They know that your eye will do this; it'll automatically adjust and make that seem brighter than it is.
Another tidbit I'll mention later on that is a small thing where they, I think it's when you get back to Lindblom, there's a scene when they find Quina on the beach.
Yes,
and the ocean behind you or behind the camera is actually, they have particle effects creating the reflective pulsing that you would get in a modern day game where they're actually simulating the water effects, and then the reflection effects. They did it with particles, and it's really well done for this era. So quick aside on just another clever use of human perception.
Yeah, that stuff is really hard to do, and they do it so well. I mean,
totally.
The fixed camera obviously helps a lot, but I remember spending a huge amount of time on Jedi Starfighter with Patrick Cirque, to try to figure out how to do like lapping waves on that island planet, which was just so like, how does that work? Like, how do you make that look decent? We're all making notes when we were taking plane trips that season. But yeah, anyway, so I got to the Ifa tree and I got down to battle the Soul Cage and I discovered that I needed to grind. Can you guess why?
What do you mean? No,
I was a multiple level 5.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh my God, I lucked out on that one. Whew.
Yep, I didn't know that was coming. And I went down there, and like 3 of my characters were level 25, I guess. And one was just below, or maybe 2 levels below. I think Aiko, whatever, was 2 levels below. And so I got totally demolished, and she doesn't have enough hit points, despite the fact she wasn't killed. She doesn't have enough hit points to hold up. So so she got destroyed pretty soon after, and I couldn't revive people fast enough. So I was like, oh man, that's annoying, because he does this whole sort of introductory monologue. He's monologuing at you, he's telling you how powerful he is and how you can never defeat him. I'm channeling a little
Incredibles.
A little Incredibles, yeah, a little Samuel L. Jackson, Mr. Freeze, at this point. But it was I was super annoyed. I was like, oh yeah, that's what I remember happening to me the first time I played, although much later in the game, I think the first time I encountered it. I feel like the first time I played this game, I got very, very lucky with that stuff for a long time. And then when it actually affected me, I had no idea what it meant. So here I ended up spending a lot of time at the top of the tree, getting blinded by mycogens, the mushroom things, and dealing with that slap happy, weird root-like thing with the multiple arms. That actually reminded me of a D&D monster whose name I can't recall, like a Exoatl or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's Cthulhu based a bit.
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time up there just running around. I had level up ability on all the characters so that they were trying to level pretty quickly, but that ended me up, with. It took quite a while because Zidane was actually pretty close to moving up and everybody else was not that close to moving up. So I kind of actually had to move him up at least a couple levels to get everybody clear of that thing. In fact, I ended up just abandoning Aiko to let her die in that first round. And I didn't need to revive her because, between the rest of us, we were plenty powerful to handle that. But, oh, man, what a frustrating little area. I mean, once you see that Grim Reaper character, and I still wouldn't have known what the heck that thing's all about if you hadn't told me last time. Yep.
And I saw it come up, and I had a panic attack, and then realized I was okay. I might have wiped maybe once or twice on the tree just naturally, and I think I also let a couple people kind of go down, and because I kept trying to revive them, but it just once you start using this Phoenix down, it just kind of gets your rhythm out of whack and you can never catch up. So I just let them stay down, and I think Dagger and Zidane finished him off. But it was a fun battle and hilarious villain monologue, especially that line you quoted in the break about how he was saying this wasn't how he foresaw his own death. And so it wasn't going to happen, and you're like, oh, no, it's going to happen, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, he says, I have seen the end of my 1,000-year life, and it is not now. Yeah. You cannot stop me. It is futile to even try.
Yeah. Which, it's a nice little moment because it makes you feel more powerful because you do finish killing him. So you feel very heroic at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, and you end up killing him, and And that basically ends the mist. And then some huge stuff happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess after that you go back to Madain Sari, and then you return to the tree. So you kind of go back and forth a little bit there, which I also like. I wouldn't want it to happen all the time, but I do love the sort of natural, like, okay, let's regroup, you know, let's just take a moment. Wow, that was tough, you know, and let's just, you know, let's go back and chill. And there's a lot to absorb here. We didn't talk a lot about sort of her, you know, her stuff, you know, how, you know, she's trying to steal Zidane away. She's like 10 or something like that. I forget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's
like
a funny character.
She's a great character. You know, and so she's so like manipulative beyond her years in the sense of what she wants. Yeah. But also just not very good at it because she's so young. Oh, that's so great. You know, that might be you know, I was talking about how Vivi would be kind of the stand-in character for nerds, but I feel like that might be a stand-in character for young girls too, maybe. You know, ones who are a little ahead of the maturity curve. Yeah. Because she's, you know, 10 going on, you know, 30. With what she's trying to do. It's very funny.
She reminded me of I don't know why, but a Peanuts, you know, either Lucy or Sally, just like a Peanuts character, in a way.
Oh yeah. Good call.
Yeah. I know, you know, obviously probably not directly, but, that's what popped into my head, especially I feel like the way Sally treats, Charlie Brown, you know?
Yep. Or Lucy and Linus, it's the same. You know, Lucy and Linus is a similar sort of, you know, like, oh, if you just noticed me, he's so focused on his, you know, the things that he does. You know, it's very similar in that way.
We have to mention that we skipped over really quickly. I can't not mention the food, cooking, clearing the table, like that whole sequence that was actually before the tree part, but was was in that village. I just had to call it out because another like. What the heck is going on here? Like, we're eating dinner at a table. We've cooked this food. They asked me all these questions about how many people were coming to the dinner. And then there's this sequence where the food flies onto the screen in its 3D form, like it was like I was playing Cooking Mama for a second or something weird. I was just like, just another, I had to mention, I just caught it in my notes of like, it's again, one of those surprising moments. Like, what are they doing? Like, this is ridiculous.
It's a really strange thing. I feel like what it sort of reminded me of is, I guess in some JRPGs, like when you get a new thing, like when you synthesize something, sometimes you see it. So you see what you've made. I feel like they did that in Dragon Quest VIII. So like you'd put this stuff in this alchemy pot, and when it would finish cooking in the alchemy pot, it would show you, oh, you have this thing now, and you would see this 3D model. I feel like that happened.
Yeah, maybe it's a trope. Yeah, but they don't do it very much.
No, they don't do it with anything else. So it is just totally weird. Yeah. And weird and one-off. It's like, oh, this is so important that we're going to do this weird thing for you. Yeah. But I wonder, like, how did you do on those quizzes?
So I don't know. I guess I did okay. I don't remember the repercussions being bad, whatever I chose. Because they ask you how many people are coming to the dinner, right? And then
and you have to
send the Mughals to do different things. And I don't remember anything going poorly. But what are the options?
I think that each of the Mughals, what I recall is each of the Mughals makes a comment about the last time you cooked, or the last time you did this, or the last time you did that. And if you have to map those up to like the one who complains about her stew or whatever, right? The one you need to send to pick potatoes, and the one who complains about her fish, you know, is the one you have to send fishing, and the other one, you know, who just knows about, you know, how much spices to use or something like that, is the one to help you in the kitchen.
Well, what happens if you get them wrong, though?
I don't think. I mean, it's not a meaningful thing. Yeah. Maybe the discussion around the table is a little more negative.
Could be. Yeah.
I think
just enough interactivity to make it feel like something happened, maybe.
Right. And I think it's just trying to reward close readers. I think it's like if you're really paying attention, like, or an alternate theory is like when you're asking how many people are going to be eating, to sort of reinforce the idea that Mughals are people, because the natural thing would be to say, well, I've got Quina and Zidane and Dagger and Aiko, and Vivi, and that's 5.
Yeah.
Even though she's like just enumerated, like, oh, you have to have, okay, it's us 5, and then and she names all the Mughals, like the Mughals rather. And I just feel like it's a moment where it's reinforcing another sort of underlying theme, which is about appearances and like how you treat people, and it's a total minor moment, but it still feels like a kind of important one from that standpoint.
Yeah, that's a good point about the Mughals. I mean, it's a minor moment, but I will probably say, I will predict that it's going to be, for whatever random reason, probably one of the more memorable things that I will, take away at the end. Because there's a lot of...
Well, and I hope you didn't get it wrong, because in the final boss, I mean...
right. When the food comes fighting.
That's right. You'll have to fight the potato soup, and you'll be in really big trouble if you get those questions wrong. Well,
but even at the end of all that whole sequence, they require you to go and pick up the clear the table. Like, it's actually a thing that Zidane has to do. Just hilarious. I don't know.
Yeah, it's so good. It's
you
so good.
expect to fight things, right? And big things to happen, but you just don't expect that stuff. So
yeah, I mean, I think it is a sort of reminder that for people who are going to play a game that has a strong narrative, they really don't necessarily mind, that they're not doing combat all the time. Famously, I'm going to misremember her name, but it's Jennifer, I want to say like Hepburn or Helprin. I'll have to look that one up so I get her name right in the show notes. But she was a BioWare designer who came on to work, I think, on Dragon Age, maybe Mass Effect, but who said something like, I really don't care about the combat. I wish I had an option just to turn all that off.
Yeah.
Which is a totally valid opinion. I think that System Shock 2, we didn't talk about it at all on the podcast, but that was a game that had really extreme difficulty options. Like you could, I think it was that one, I think you could turn down the combat to be really, really easy, and you could turn up, game doesn't have a lot of puzzles per se, but I think you could turn that up. I feel like there were 3 different axes of difficulty that you could fiddle with. I mean, you had to go into config files and things like that. But I remember that being really, really surprising for the time that it had like that level of variability.
Yeah, and I mean,
I might be misremembering it. It might have been something around that time. It might have been like Thief or something. But it was a game in that era, and I really want to say it was in that engine.
Deus Ex, maybe.
It might also have been Deus Ex. Yeah. Possible.
Well, I mean, to your point about Jennifer's point about Dragon Age, or her comment, that's starting to be a thing more and more, right? I mean, Mass Effect 3 had forget what they call it, narrative mode or something, and then I guess I haven't played it yet, but Uncharted 4 has an exploration mode. Actually, I just
replayed the first 3, and at least in the re-release, the remaster, they all have that. They call it Explorer mode, I think.
Oh, okay.
Which is basically, I think they do turn off certain achievements. Like I think maybe you can't get achievements as a result. So there's a lot of combat-oriented achievements in those games, and I don't think you can get them, as well as some sort of speedrunning ones. And it if you put it in Explorer mode, it just comes up and tells you certain things are not achievable, which is totally fine by me. I mean, I expect if you're like, I mean, that's a trade-off that they're kind of making on the benefit of the audience. Like, it's like, oh, well, we don't want to tick off the people who feel like they should be achieving something and always play things on the hardest difficulty, which would have been me in 2000, versus, hey, I just want to really experience this game because I've heard a lot about its story qualities and it's really beautiful or whatever. I want to play an Indiana Jones type game, and not die all the time.
Yeah.
In fact, we never talked about this, but it must be TV night.
Yeah, you can hear the girls up there.
I can hear them laughing hysterically. One of the things I thought I would have liked most, because I was going to be at LucasArts after the reboot, and they were going to do an Indiana Jones title, and my design idea was I wanted in an Indiana Jones game to not be able to die, as long as you did something. As long as you were you could be mashing the buttons. I wanted the game to just react to that and do something appropriate, and allow you to not die just by, because that's Indiana Jones, right? I mean, that was my feeling about the guy, right? Is that, it's really jarring to me to play a game where this is a hero who never dies. And like, as I talked about with Hitman 2, I make up stories in my head for how this can work. I have to come up with metafiction to explain what is actually going on here, that this person can die multiple times and then succeed at this thing that they're doing. Like, not always, but certainly in Hitman 2 I did. So it's I don't know.
You mentioned Prince of Persia as well as another.
Yeah, right. That's
example.
And that was a great example of like, oh, okay, here's a game. Yeah, this is Sands of Time, I guess. It was, it found a way in it to excuse the fact that your main character died.
Yeah.
And I thought, I love that sort of thing.
Well, another quick example, and not to get too far off track, but when Arkham came out, I don't know if you played it or remember.
Oh, I did.
One of the nice economical design choices they made, it wasn't necessarily for combat, because you could still essentially quote unquote die in combat, I believe.
Yes.
But when you fell off of things, right, and you missed jumps, they would just cut, and he would just climb up the nearest ledge to where your save point was, or where your checkpoint was, and it didn't have this sense that you would have in, say, another platformer, Tomb Raider or Uncharted, where you just kind of fall to your death, because Batman doesn't, he doesn't fall. Like he might miss a jump, but he'll always grapple his way back. And it was a simple thing, and all it really was presentation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm totally fine with that. Like I love that in games. Anyway. But sorry if you end up getting screwed in the final boss to pull back to Final Fantasy IX.
Well, then it'll be very memorable at that point.
Yeah, it will be. I feel like that is something that could happen with earlier, maybe not the PlayStation 1 era, but it feels like something that could happen with earlier games in this series.
Oh, yeah.
There would be a real risk. Yeah, or just in RPGs, earlier RPGs in general. Having played some early Ultimas last year, those games are unforgiving in the extreme.
Yeah.
From things like that. Oh, hey, you didn't do this thing. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're done. Hope you have a save. It's brutal. And that's one of the things, going back and playing games from a modern perspective, that I probably fear most, is that I'm going to sink a lot of time into something and then have a thing that I didn't know about really, really affect me. But anyway, I kind of wonder to what degree that happened to you this time with Tetra Master.
So we can. I think it's a good. We can jump into that. I guess we have some big moments we can talk about too. But Tetra Master, I think, because you mentioned earlier that I'm kind of the OCD completist, and I look in every nook and cranny. I noticed that when you get to both Alexandria and Treno, yeah. Yep. They, for whatever reason, they put a bunch of random cards laying around the towns. And so I ended up finding quite a few, and I had saved. I hadn't been playing the card game, but you get cards from random encounters as well.
That's correct. Yeah.
So I think maybe because I was grinding so much or something, I had actually built up quite a pool. And you and I were texting back and forth, I think, while we were kind of very similarly, in a very similar spot in the game. And you had suggested that I should go and look up some strategies on that. And throughout the podcast, I never, do that. But in this case, I did break that rule once. And then the irony is I went to go look up some strategies and watch a couple of videos, and I'm still not sure I could describe to you how that game works. And so I did get through the tournament, and I understand the arrows, and I think I understand the nomenclature for the different stats on the cards and a few things, but like why I win or lose sometimes, I'm really not sure. There's some hexadecimal stuff going on. It's just crazy.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that I've never understood is that sometimes a large number will appear on a card, and a smaller number will appear on your card.
There's some equation, right?
Yeah, sometimes you'll lose that, and sometimes you'll win that, and I'm like, I have no.
Yeah, Gwent is a lot clearer and easier to get better at.
Yeah, I mean, I only played that like once because I didn't play the game very much, so I just didn't have many opportunities. But yeah, I mean, this is actually one of the things that I will say I often find frustrating in Final Fantasy games, because sometimes they have these sort of side games. And Jason Schreier, particularly likes the one in Final Fantasy IX. He's like an excellent card game with a free RPG thrown in. I find them really obscure, and Final Fantasy X is another one which has this game called Blitzball. I couldn't even. It's sort of like soccer, but tactical. I mean, I can't even begin to. Like, I have no idea. And one of the things I like best about Tetra Master is that it'll flip a coin, and most of the time the other guy will go first, because I feel like that gives me an advantage. Because I don't really know what's going on, so at least I know I'll get to go last, and therefore have a chance to change the board at the end. I feel like there's a real advantage to going second in this game. Yeah. Anyway, let's go back to the IFA tree, because we didn't talk about the really big story stuff that happened there. I kind of was following the thread and got to Tetra Master. But yeah, big stuff happens there, huh?
Yeah. Geez. I mean, there's so much that happens. I'm even trying to remember back to all of the stuff, even though I think I played it fairly recently, just with Kuja showing up and some more big summoning going on. By the way, a quick aside on that, I'd been hearing about Final Fantasy games obviously throughout most of my life, and the summoning of all the big what are they called? Eidolons?
They actually have them in voice lines in Final Fantasy 13 as Eidolons.
Eidolons. Oh, okay. Well,
which is like learning that George pronounces it Hoth.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So the Eidolons, and they're definitely paying off, right? You're just like, oh, I remember when 7 came out, and everyone's like, oh my god, the summoning is so awesome because they're just so big. But then, yeah, once you play them over and over again. But in the pre-rendered cutscenes, they do a good job at presenting them for the first time there usually.
Yes.
And so some big ones obviously happen there. The big eye in the sky, I'm still not quite sure what's going on there, but yeah, with the big attack and Dagger's mother washing up on shore, and holy, yeah, so many big things happening there, and they're just not afraid to do that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they're not afraid, and it totally changes the direction that you think the story's going to go.
Yeah.
Because now, I mean, and we'll get back to Alexandria in a moment, but now it's like, oh, so she's got to go be queen now. Yeah. Like, I guess we're all done with that. Like, and you're only at the end of, that's basically the end of the second disc, in a 4-disc game, so a lot is coming, but you're like, as a player, kind of at the meta level at that point, you'd be like, so am I not going to have, is this going to be like Eris dying? Is she's not going to be around anymore, and I'm not going to hear more about this story? It's kind of a big deal.
Oh, I see. Maybe because she becomes queen.
Right, exactly, because it feels like she's going to come out of the story.
Right,
you know?
Right. I had that same thought. So you just made an interesting point that I wonder that I'm playing on the PC, right? So I'm like getting the benefit of the disc breaks, which are they super intentional in like in the past, but for this game and 7 and others, like do the discs typically end like, the act of a play where it's like, the end of act 1 going into act 2 or what have you, or in Shakespeare's case, multiple acts. Like they're written intentionally to have the crescendo and the ebbs and flows there. Is that the case for the discs?
Yes, I think it is. No, it's definitely specific.
Interesting.
The disc change happens, I think, I'd have to double check this, but as I recall, the first disc ends with Southgate destroyed. Remember when you make your way through there and that the Black Waltz is chasing you? And
yeah.
So I think that's the last on that. And the reason why the discs have to be split up, right, is these are CDs. So that's like 660 megabytes or something like that. So, you were stuck with a fairly low amount of stuff, and there's a lot of cutscenes in the first part of the game.
Yeah.
Just establishing the game, like there's an intro cutscene that is not part of the game. It's just the teaser stuff. And, so there's a lot of, I guess what they used to call a tracked mode, but there's a lot of that stuff. So that first disc doesn't have maybe quite as big an event at the end, but this one, it's huge. And there are maybe fewer movies in between. I think it's basically the Eidolons who have them at this point. So Lindblom getting destroyed or partially destroyed by Atomos, and Clara getting destroyed by Odin. And here you've got Bahamut showing up and that eye in the sky. It's funny. I expected you to reference Sauron with that because
I immediately thought of it. I should have.
Yeah, it occurred to you. Yeah, for sure.
But I guess I was just making the point. No, I definitely understand why the discs were there. I guess I'm making the point of it's experientially different playing it, I would assume, back then on the actual disc, the way you'd play it, because there is this sort of sense of anticipation and almost like a TV show, where it's like you finish a big episode and it's like, oh, I'm going to get to go to the next disc, and see what happens, or this is a good place to stop because this big thing happened. For me, for me playing it, after the fact, this is all just kind of streaming together. But it did feel like the end of an act for sure, right? Because like you said, now Dagger has moved on into a different role, and all of that stuff, and then you're back to Alexandria, and to kind of come full circle to that earlier topic we had about pacing and the Summoner Village being a nice kind of downbeat. The section here where once all that kind of blows over and you're back in Alexandria, it dragged on for me. Like it was too much downtime. Just kind of going back and forth and talking to everybody, and kind of all of the exposition that was happening, and Zidane was moping and and becoming true to form for his Hamlet-esque archetype or what have you.
Right.
And I just kind of I definitely wanted it to to end. And so luckily it does get to a point where when it progresses, it's pretty big and cool.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel a little bit like a misstep, like it's spending way too much time on every possible character who could be involved at this point. Yeah,
they didn't need it. They could have cut it in half probably.
Yeah, I mean, they could have taken out. I mean, there's some good stuff there that is, that ties in with the Shakespearean themes we talked about, and like that love letter that keeps.
Yep, I wrote that note down.
Changing hands.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
I love that stuff. It doesn't seem super necessary, at least at this point in the plot. It does feel, but on the other hand, it feels like, well, they're hooked now. So now we can set some new stuff in motion because we've just tied off a lot of threads.
Yeah.
And we've introduced some questions, but they're not really ready to go pursue them yet. So we need to kind of like regather our forces. We need to touch base on the fact that, that Zidane is maybe, that he's an orphan, as was described in kind of a touching scene when he was on the boat. or I guess it was.
I'm trying to remember.
Well, there was a very touching little romantic scene where Zidane and Dagger kind of drift out of a cove, in the little rowboat, and she remembers, and you see that big red eye in the sky for the first time, and she realizes that she's having a memory from when the village was destroyed. So there's all kinds of great little things there that have kind of been set in motion, and questions that have to be answered, mysteries that have been developed. But I will agree with you. It definitely feels, I wouldn't be surprised if it's about the same length as the opening section that happens at the castle at the very beginning of the game, but it feels a lot longer. Yeah,
it could be. And then you go to Treno after that, right? So it's like kind of keeps going. And I mean, I know the exposition they're trying to deliver does have meaning, and there's a lot of cool backstory coming from it. But I don't know, it just drug on for me. So, it was after all the big stuff that happened, it was the right time to do that kind of, beat. But they've had so many characters introduced at that point, including the
Tantalus troop.
Yeah, bringing all of them back. You have the redheaded big green guy, Amaranth. Fire. What's his name? Fiery Amaranth or something.
Flaming Amaranth.
Flaming Amaranth. Yeah. So it's like it's like there's all these little threads there that I'm sure they'll pay off eventually. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there, and it does get to be a bit much, and I kind of wish we'd push forward, but I was feeling a little fatigued myself at that point, just of like, okay, I need to take a little break here now that I've got past that Tetra Master tournament.
Well, I feel like we're kind of on the cusp because we ended with the quest of basically, it seems like we're going to cure Sid of his Ogolop disease or what have you, or curse, and it seems like something's building back up. So I'm excited to start playing again because it feels like that's kind of the next hurdle to get over.
Yep, for sure. All right, well, let's take another break there, and then we'll come back and talk about what's next time. And I want to read a reader mail that we got, which I think we should discuss a little bit. Some feedback on an earlier episode, and we'll just do our normal outro stuff. Okay?
Cool.
Kupo? Well, we've filled up our transmitters. We're ready to go here after coming back from the break. We wanted to just touch on a couple things real quick. In particular, we've got a reader mail that I thought was pretty interesting and touched on some stuff that came up in an earlier episode. So this was a gentleman named Johnson Xiao from Hong Kong. Who's been enjoying the podcast and really likes, coming from this sort of perspective that we have. In particular, he agrees with Tim that he's not hugely a fan of the grinding experience and things like that. And he was not himself much of a JRPG fan. So here's his thought, and I'll just read directly. Perhaps grinding to a reasonable level is not what was originally intended by the designers as the main way to progress, but the alternative. I generally would find myself with an abundance of coin in these type of games because I shied away from purchasing potions and items to use in battle simply because I saw them as almost cheating the game, similar to in-app purchases in pay-to-win free-to-play games. What if, though, the difficulty balance assumed players would consume one-use items often, hence the seemingly excess amount of coin players receive from battles? Hope to hear your thoughts about it and keep up the good work. Cheers.
Yeah, that thought has occurred to me as well, because I feel like from a balance, tuning and balancing perspective, obviously something that's always on my mind personally. In any game I'm playing, it seems super clear that the consumables are a fundamental part of how they want you to play the game, which is fairly counter to, I would say I'm generalizing, but I think fairly counter to Western RPGs, you know, like, yes, you have potions available and stuff, but the balancing that they do often for those Western games is not reliant on that. But man, I think you cannot play this game, I feel like, unless you're grinding the hell out of things, you cannot play this game without using a bunch of consumables during a battle.
Right. I actually wonder if it's an opportunity for player expression, because a player who just genuinely loves the combat and is fine with going out and battling all day long might just choose to do that instead. You know, as I mentioned before, you know, I did that in order to prepare, you know, for battling Soul Cage, in order to get up to a non-multiple of 5 level, and I found myself getting a lot better at the combat because I knew, you know, what weaknesses that characters had, and you know, I just got a real sense of, oh, okay, I can do this, I can do that. You know, I definitely want to use, you know, this attack, and I should use, you know, the steal ability because I'm not at really any risk, and I have lots of tents. Like I was making all these decisions about the combat because I was playing the same 3 enemies over and over again. And I do feel like if you're spending a lot of time on the grinding, and that's a thing you like, you're perfectly well rewarded for that. And if not, you do have so much money, you know, through other means that maybe you can just go and do that instead.
Soft gives you soft options in case.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, because it is a very, I forgot to mention another note that we don't have to talk deeply about now, but I wrote down a note that just simply says gear matters. And the thing that I didn't realize about this genre of game, or at least Final Fantasy games, is that I feel like gear matters way more than it ever has to me in other RPGs. And I think that's a cool thing, but it also adds, as we talked about in a previous episode, it adds this puzzly aspect to things if you want to engage with it. And you can either over level, you can use your consumables, or if you want to figure out the sort of, you know, the abilities / gear / you know, all of that stuff. And the elemental rock, paper, scissors, then you could play this very puzzly and be fulfilled in a different way, I guess. Right.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that, you know, I find myself, when I have time to do lots of combat, one of the things that's been really interesting playing this alongside Final Fantasy 13 is that in Final Fantasy 13, I really never have a lot of money. I mean, I just feel like it is so counter to my expectations of a Final Fantasy game. You know, I just don't have enough money to buy anything. I don't have enough money to buy potions, never mind. You know, there was a point where I had a whole bunch, and there's a big weapon upgrade system in it. So I ended up investing a lot into that. And so I realized that part of this is my fault. But I feel like I sold some resources that I wouldn't have otherwise, you know, I wouldn't normally have done. And I wonder if that's like a formula refinement that's kind of happening. I'm not sure if they're trying to make that more, I don't know, if the player is supposed to spend a little bit more effort on that.
Well, you know, something that just occurred to me too, that because I'm playing Witcher 3, I'm continuing to play Witcher 3 at the same time. I guess this isn't the case for not all the Western RPGs, but you could say for the Bethesda games and a few others, there's skill as a part of the paradigm in a lot of those games, right? So one of the valves that you have to release in any combat endeavor is how skillful you are. And in this game, there's none of that, right? So you just have to, it's all, timing based, but rock, paper, scissor based, and like that puzzly aspect. And so they have to rely on that. They don't have
it's not explicitly a player skill, like in a physical skill sense. It's more of a mental skill of, can I puzzle out and remember, you know, what the different monsters have as weaknesses and stuff, so I don't have to take a step to determine them.
Yeah, I mean, so the other thing I was going to mention, to be kind of based on what he was asking in his mail, is the cynical designer in me. I would bet that the initial system design for this game was heavily reliant on, or these games, I guess I'll say, maybe this goes all the way back to Final Fantasy.
Yeah, I would say it probably goes back.
was heavily reliant on the rock, paper, scissors puzzle-y aspect, and they realized that it was going to be too difficult for too many people, so they added in. I don't think that the consumable release valve or the money release valve was part of the whole balancing. I would bet that those are semi-Band-Aids based on, and again, this is my cynical designer coming through, but knowing that there are these other subsystems that you put in, like currency and consumables, and then those are numbers that are easily tweakable, right, to design the game when the puzzle aspect becomes too difficult, for people.
Well, I just want to say address email to Tim when you email to devgameclub@gmail.com because he can...
I'm sure people are yelling at the, at their iPods or iPhones, etc. right now. But the truth of the matter is that you start with best intentions, and you want to design this perfect system that is perfectly balanced and has all these, cause and effects, and it's really clear to people. And then you get in there playtesting, and you need to have some variables that, other than just damage in health, that give people more options. I mean, I like how you put it, player expression. I would love to give them that much credit that was actually the initial intention, but I'm betting it's more of like, we need some stuff in here to really soften the blows. Huh.
Again, that email address is...
Hey, this is an awesome game, but it is not perfect. So anyway.
No game is. So.
No game is. Definitely no game I've worked on. So
in any case. Well, thank you, Johnson, for your question.
Yeah,
we really appreciated having that. I actually have a question I want to throw out to the audience because it's really, for me, a point of information. It's something I don't know a lot about Japanese culture. One of the things that I've seen a lot in Japanese games, a little bit here with the descent into the Ifa tree, a little bit in Final Fantasy VII, which goes down into Sephiroth's lair. I've seen it a little bit in Metal Gear, and definitely in a memorable sequence in Silent Hill 2, where you go deeper and deeper and deeper into this building. And one other we talked about on the break with Shadows of the Colossus, are these sort of often spiral staircases down into the depths of a thing. And I just wonder, like, that has obvious Western connotations of descending into the underworld or something like that. And I didn't know if that was the same in Japanese culture or if it means a specific thing. Does it mean diving deeper, for example, instead of diving, when I mean diving deeper, like psychologically speaking? I just get this sense sometimes that I'm missing some... I don't know. I guess you'd call it semiotics. There's your $60 word for the episode. But I feel like I might be missing a cultural thing about what it means to descend into the depths in Japanese culture that might be different. Because I know that there are real differences between Western and Eastern culture, like what color represents death, for example, or something like that. So. If anybody's got thoughts about that, please send them our way. I'll give the email again at the end, but it's devgameclub@gmail.com. So I would love to hear what you have to say. I'm not getting so much email that I won't read all of it, so just send it in. I don't care if I get 2,000 emails saying, you idiot, this is what Japanese culture has to do with descent. So... now I guess we talk about next time. We talked a little bit about, where we were in the discs. I think we're going to try to finish off what would have been disc 3. We're playing on the PC and we don't have those restrictions. But disc 3 ended by a visit to Pandemonium, which is a crazy sounding location name. I feel like I'm already giving Tim hints just naming it. But it is a place that you get to, I believe, at the end of disc 3 and on the original PS1 version. And we'll just kind of try to get to it, not necessarily to complete it, which will leave us kind of a whole episode to talk about the real ending of the game, which, as I mentioned, has some long cutscenes explaining everything that happened. And as well as that, to give us multiple shots at bosses, which can be very, very frustrating. I wrote a blog post some years ago about Kingdom Hearts and how absolutely frustrating the end boss of that game is, considering the presumably wider audience that they were going for. It's a little bit more forgivable in these earlier JRPGs where they kind of knew their audience was, these particular people, but not so much, not so much Kingdom Hearts. Okay, so that's what we've got for this episode. Again, thanks for all the new listeners. It's been really, really great to have the wider response. Thanks again to Jason Schreier over at Kotaku. I know he's a big JRPG fan, and we are kindred in that respect. In the meantime, you can find us at Twitter at DevGameClub. I am at Brett_Duville, and this guy is...
at Tim Longo Jr. with a JR in the end.
And you can find us, I've given our email once as devgameclub@gmail.com. Our website is www.devgameclub.com. Lots of Dev Game Club. We'd love to have some more ratings and reviews and any descriptions up there in iTunes if you have a moment. 5 stars is great. That's our current average. We're trying to keep that average.
Thanks for those. That's been wonderful.
It's really great. I love to be able to read those as well, and I will try to work in time to read reviews as they come up in the future as well. And that's all we've got this time. Thanks very much. I'm Brett Duville, and he's
Tim Longo.
All right. Good night.
Good night.